Okay, so you've been working through organic chemistry, right? And I know looking at molecules drawn flat on a page, it can be, well, tough to picture them. But what if the real secret isn't just what they're made of, but their actual 3D shape? Like how they twist and turn in space. It turns out understanding these shapes unlocks a huge part of chemistry. And sometimes atoms can even, change shape depending on the situation. It's kind of wild.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're digging into Chapter 4, Geometry, from Organic Chemistry as a Second Language. We want to help you get to the point where predicting the 3D shape of a molecule feels totally natural.
Yeah, and it's not just about knowing the shapes for fun. The why is absolutely critical.
Hmm?
Molecular geometry directly impacts how molecules react, or sometimes if they can react at all. We call this idea sterics. Basically, if the important reactive parts of two molecules can't physically get close enough because other atoms are in the way, well, the reaction just won't happen. Sterics, right? Like imagine you're trying to grab something inside a really packed cupboard. If there's too much other stuff blocking your hand, you just can't reach it. Molecules are like that too. The reactive bits need space to meet up. If they're crowded out, no deal, no reaction.
Exactly. And this isn't some far-off concept. You'll hit it almost immediately when you learn about SN1 versus SN2 reactions.
Yeah.
The geometry often decides everything, which reaction happens, how fast it happens. Our goal here is really to make predicting geometry second nature for you. You
Mhm.
look at an atom, you instantly know its shape.
Love it. So how do we actually do that? How do we predict the geometry? It starts really fundamentally with the bonds between atoms, right? Bonds form when electrons overlap. And electrons live in these regions called orbitals. So understanding orbitals seems like the first step.
Spot on. And for organic chemistry, we mainly care about two basic types of atomic orbitals. There are s orbitals, think of them as just simple spheres, and then there are p orbitals, which look more like two lobes, like a dumbbell shape. Now, the key atoms in organic chemistry, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, those second row elements, they usually have 1s and 3p orbitals available in their outer shell for bonding.
Okay, 1s, 3p's, but here's the part that always felt a bit like magic to me. They don't always use those s and p orbitals as they are, do they? They mix them up.
That's right. It's called hybridization. It's essentially a mathematical mixing, like you said. The atom combines its s and p orbitals to create a new set of identical hybrid orbitals.
The book uses this analogy of swimming pools, right? Like taking a round pool and maybe a figure-8 pool and somehow ending up with, say, four identical rectangular pools.
Exactly. It's a way for the atom to create the best possible arrangement for bonding. Stronger, more stable bonds. So if you mix 1s and 1p orbital, you get two identical sp orbitals. Mix 1s and 2p orbitals. You get three identical sp2 orbitals, and there's one p orbital left over, unhybridized. And if you mix the 1s and all three p orbitals, you get four identical sp3 orbitals.
And these new hybrid orbitals, these sp2c3 things, they're what the atom actually uses to form bonds or hold lone pairs.
Precisely. Each hybrid orbital can hold electrons to form a single bond, or it can hold a lone pair of electrons that aren't involved in bonding.
Okay, so how do you, the listener, figure out which hybridization an atom is using? SPV, SP2, or C3?
Well, thankfully, there's a really straightforward rule. It just comes down to counting. Are you ready?
Lay it on us.
You just count two things for the central atom you're interested in. First, the number of other atoms directly bonded to it. Second, the number of lone pairs sitting on that central atom. Add those two numbers together. The total tells you how many hybrid orbitals the atom needs.
Ah, okay. So the sum of bonded atoms plus lone pairs. Got it. What do the numbers mean then?
If the sum is 4, the atom needs 4 hybrid orbitals, so it's p3 hybridized. It used the s in all three p's.
Right.
If the sum is 3, it needs 3 hybrid orbitals, so it's p2 hybridized. It used the s in 2 p's, leaving 1 p orbital unused in the hybridization.
Okay.
And if the sum is 2, it needs 2 hybrid orbitals. That means it's sp hybridized, using the s and just 1 p, leaving 2 p orbitals unhybridized.
That actually sounds manageable. Can we try an example? Maybe that H2CO molecule from the book, formaldehyde?
Sure, great example. Let's look at the central carbon atom in H2CO. First, how many atoms are bonded to it?
Let's see. There's an oxygen and 2 hydrogens. That's 3 atoms.
Correct. Now, how many lone pairs are on the carbon itself?
In formaldehyde,
Yeah.
none, right? Carbon usually makes 4 bonds if it can. Here, it has a double bond to oxygen and single bonds to the hydrogens. No lone pairs on carbon.
Exactly. So the sum is 3 bonded atoms plus 0 lone pairs. That equals 3.
Which means, based on the rule, that carbon must be sp2 hybridized.
You got it. It uses 3 sp2 orbitals for its bonds. one for the oxygen sigma bond, one for each hydrogen, and has that one leftover p orbital which forms the pi part of the double bond with oxygen.
Okay, I'm following. What about something with a lone pair, like ammonia, NH3?
Good one. Let's do the nitrogen in ammonia. How many atoms bonded to the nitrogen?
3 hydrogens.
Right. And how many lone pairs on the nitrogen?
Just one. Nitrogen typically has 5 valence electrons, uses 3 for bonds here, so there's 1 pair left over.
Perfect. So the sum is 3 bonded atoms plus 1 lone pair. That equals 4.
4. So the nitrogen in ammonia is sp3 hybridized. Even though it's only bonded to 3 things, that lone pair counts.
It absolutely counts. It occupies one of those 4 sp3 hybrid orbitals.
This counting thing seems pretty solid, and the book mentions a shortcut specifically for carbon atoms too, right? Based on the types of bonds.
Yeah, it's super useful because carbon is everywhere in organic chemistry. Once you get used to it, you often don't even need to count. If a carbon atom has 4 single bonds, it's always p3. Think methane CH4.
Makes sense. 4 plus 0 is 4.
If a carbon has 1 double bond and 2 single bonds, it's sp2, like our formaldehyde example, or ethylene.
Right, 3 plus 0 equals 3.
And if a carbon has 1 triple bond and 1 single bond, or maybe 2 double bonds, it's sp. Think acetylene.
Acetylene, yeah. 2 plus 0 is 2. That's a great shortcut.
It becomes almost automatic with practice. You just glance at the carbon and,
Okay, so we've figured out hybridization sp3, sp2. Now, how does that tell us the actual 3D shape around that atom?
This is where VSEPR theory comes in. Valence shell electron pair repulsion.
Sounds fancy.
It does, but the idea is really simple. All those electron groups around the central atom, whether they're in bonds or they're lone pairs, they all repel each other. They're all negatively charged, right?
Right, like charges repel.
So they're going to arrange themselves in space to get as far away from each other as possible. That arrangement, the one that minimizes the repulsion, that's the geometry.
Okay, minimize repulsion. So what shapes do they make? Let's start with sp3. 4 groups trying to get away from each other.
4 groups get furthest apart in a tetrahedral shape. Imagine a central atom with 4 bonds pointing towards the corners of a pyramid with a triangular base. Or like a tripod with another leg sticking straight up.
Tetrahedral, like methane, CH4. And the angle between the bonds is about 109.5 degrees.
Exactly. That's the ideal tetrahedral angle. Now, what about sp2? 3 electron groups.
3 things trying to get apart in 3D space. They'd probably spread out flat, wouldn't they? Like a triangle?
Spot on. It's called trigonal planar. All 3 groups lie on the same plane, and the angle between them is 120 degrees. Perfectly flat triangle.
Like the carbon in formaldehyde we talked about.
Precisely. And remember that leftover p orbital. It sits perpendicular to that flat plane, sticking straight up and down.
Got it. And the last one, spt, only 2 electron groups.
Easiest one. How do 2 things get furthest apart?
They go in opposite directions. A straight line.
Exactly. Linear geometry. The angle is 180 degrees, like the carbons in acetylene. And the 2 leftover t orbitals. They're perpendicular to each other and to the line of the sp orbitals.
Okay, tetrahedral sp3, trigonal planar sp2, linear sp. That seems clear if all the groups are bonds, but what happens when one of those sp3 or sp2 orbitals has a lone pair instead of a bond? Does the shape name change?
Yes. This is a really important point and a common source of confusion. The arrangement of the electron groups themselves doesn't really change much. 4 groups on a sp3 atom are still roughly tetrahedral in their arrangement. 3 groups on sp2 atom are still roughly trigonal planar.
Okay.
But when we talk about the molecular geometry, we only describe the shape based on the positions of the atoms, not the lone pairs. The lone pairs are there, they take up space, they repel, but they're invisible in the final molecular shape description.
They're like invisible bullies pushing the atoms around.
Kinda. They definitely
Whoa.
push the bonding pairs. Let's take ammonia, NH3 again. We said the nitrogen is sp3, so it's 4 electron groups, 3 bonds to H, 1 lone pair are arranged tetrahedrally.
Right.
But when we name the molecular shape, we ignore the lone pair and just look at the N and the 3 H atoms. What shape do they form?
Well, it's like a pyramid with the nitrogen at the top and the 3 hydrogens forming a triangular base.
Exactly. So the molecular geometry is called trigonal pyramidal. It started as tetrahedral electron geometry, but the invisible lone pair makes the molecular shapes trigonal pyramidal.
I see. And what about water, H2O? Oxygen is also sp3, right? 2 bonds to H, 2 lone pairs, 2 plus 2, 4.
Correct. Oxygen is sp3, so its 4 electron groups are arranged tetrahedrally. But now 2 of them are lone pairs.
So if we ignore the 2 lone pairs and just look at the oxygen and the 2 hydrogens, they just form a kind of V shape.
Precisely. The molecular geometry is called bent. Again, it started as tetrahedral electron geometry, but the two lone pairs pushed the hydrogens closer together, making the molecule bent.
Okay, this distinction between electron geometry and molecular geometry is crucial. So let's recap the molecular shapes we need to know.
There are basically 6 key ones based on hybridization and lone pairs.
For sp3, 0 lone pairs is tetrahedral, 1 lone pair is trigonal pyramidal, 2 lone pairs is bent.
That's right. And for sp2,
Okay, sp2 dude 0 lone pairs is trigonal planar. What if it has 1 lone pair? It only has 2 bonds then.
if an sp2 atom has 1 lone pair, it still has 3 electron groups arranged in a trigonal plane. But you ignore the lone pair for the molecular shape, leaving just the central atom and 2 bonded atoms.
Ah, so it would also look bent, just like the sp3 case with 2 lone pairs, but maybe with a different angle.
Exactly. It's also called bent. The angle will be different, typically closer to 120 degrees because it started from trigonal planar. So sp2 with 1 lone pair is bent.
Got it. And finally, sp0 lone pairs is linear. Can sp have lone pairs?
It could theoretically, but it's very rare in the common atoms we see in first semester organic chemistry. So for practical purposes, sp means linear.
Okay, so the 6 are tetrahedral, trigonal pyramidal, bent from sp3, trigonal planar, bent from c2, and linear.
That's the list. So the strategy is always, step 1, find the hybridization by counting atoms and lone pairs. Step 2, look at the number of lone pairs and pick the right molecular geometry name from that list of 6.
Let's try formaldehyde again. Carbon was sp2, 0 lone pairs. Step 1, sp2. Step 2, 0 lone pairs. Look at the list. Ha! Trigonal planar.
See? Simple 2-step process.
The key, I imagine, is practice. Doing this over and over until you don't even need the list anymore.
Absolutely. You want to be able to look at any atom in any structure, maybe something complex later in the course, and just see its geometry instantly. Tetrahedral here, trigonal planar there. Oh, that one's bent.
Okay, that covers the main rules, but you mentioned sometimes things get tricky. Is there an exception we need to watch out for?
Yes. There's one major exception involving lone pairs, and it has to do with resonance.
Ah, resonance, where electrons can move around, delocalize over multiple atoms.
Exactly. Now, the general rule we just learned is that lone pairs sit in hybrid orbitals, right?
Yeah.
Like the sp3 orbital for the lone pair in ammonia.
Yes.
However, if a lone pair can participate in resonance, meaning it's next to a pi system like a double bond, and can be drawn in a resonance structure moving into that pi system, then it cannot be in a hybrid orbital.
Whoa, okay. Why not?
Because to be part of that delocalized pi system, the lone pair must be in an unhybridized p orbital. P orbitals are what overlap side to side to form pi bonds and allow for that electron delocalization. Hybrid orbitals are generally used for sigma bonds and localized lone pairs.
So if a lone pair can do resonance, it chooses to sit in a p orbital instead of a hybrid orbital.
It essentially has to enable the stability gained from resonance. So imagine an atom, say a nitrogen that looks like it should be sp3 based on counting maybe 3 bonds and 1 lone pair, 3 + 1, 4. You'd predict trigonal pyramidal.
Right.
But if that lone pair is right next to a double bond, meaning it can participate in resonance,
Then it has to be in a p orbital.
which means the atom can't be sp3 hybridized. To have that p orbital available for the lone pair, the atom must actually be sp2 hybridized, using only 2 p orbitals for hybridization, leaving 1 p orbital free.
Wow. So resonance overrides the basic counting rule for hybridization.
In a way, yes. The possibility of resonance forces the atom into the hybridization state in sp2 that allows the lone pair to occupy a p orbital.
And if the atom is forced to be sp2 instead of sp3, its geometry changes too. Instead of trigonal pyramidal.
It will be trigonal planar, because sp2 geometry is trigonal planar. This is a huge difference and a common mistake if you don't check for resonance.
That is a massive aha moment. So the takeaway is always check if a lone pair can participate in resonance before finalizing the hybridization in geometry. If it can, it's likely in a p orbital, making the atom sp2 and trigonal planar, even if simple counting suggested sp3.
You've nailed it. That's the critical exception. Recognizing that shows a much deeper understanding. And stepping back, you can see how powerful this all is. Understanding geometry isn't just about drawing molecules correctly. It's about predicting reactivity, understanding why certain drugs fit certain receptors, why materials have specific properties. It all comes back to shape.
It really is incredible. Thinking about how these tiny, tiny arrangements of atoms dictate so much. Like how a drug works in your body depends on its precise 3D shape fitting into a biological molecule, like a key in a lock. Or how the properties of a new plastic or metal depend on how the molecules pack together, which is determined by their shapes. These microscopic geometries have huge macroscopic consequences. Well, we really hope this deep dive into molecular geometry has helped clear things up and given you a solid framework, a map really, for navigating the 3D world of organic chemistry. Practice identifying those 6 shapes. Thank you so much for joining us and being part of this deep dive family. We'll catch you on the next one.